Boy, we've really raised a lot of issues in this Bryan Kohberger case, and one thing I'm not really clear about is the number of cell towers and whether they really can triangulate his location. Do you really know about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how that they could determine his location and how that kind of stuff works.
Well, it works in some other cases that are less rural, but let's take a closer look now, and maybe we'll have a guest help us with this.
The Bryan Kohberger case has us scratching our head about a lot of things, and it's kind of hard to make sense out of everything. That being said, I'm Lainey Law.
And I'm attorney Andrew Myers.
And on today's show, we have a special guest, EvillCJ. Hello, welcome on to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me. And you guys are both amazing.
Well, you do a lot of longer content. It's all we can do to go for 20 or 40 minutes, but I see that you go often for 2-3 hours or more. How do you do it?
Coffee and passion. Really, it's a miracle.
Wow.
Dedication. That's a lot of dedication to be on it as often as you are and on top of things. It's crazy.
Now, one of the things that has really challenged me in this case, and we've been doing, 5 things about the case, 5 things about the case, 5 things about the case, and we haven't run out of things. But one of the things that really stumps me is the cell phones and the towers and the streets in Moscow, Idaho. I actually had a person call me. One of our viewers called me, and we had a conversation, and she was saying, there's hardly any cell towers. And so if he came over from Pullman, Washington, over to Moscow, Idaho, and went to Walmart, that ping would show up as though he was, going around the girl's house 12 times, like they said in the probable cause affidavit. I don't know. Can you give us some background on that whole issue?
Well, it's not Chicago, so it's not going to have a lot of towers. It does have some. It is a smaller area. Pullman and Moscow both are kind of like, even though they're smaller cities, they're like the bigger cities in that general area. So they're going to have a few towers here and there. Now you can go to a website, map.coveragemap.com, and you can literally put in all carriers or just a select carrier, and you can see the coverage zones for yourself.
Now, I did that. I went on to one of the websites. I don't know if it's one you're talking about, and there were a million dots. And so I took out TV antennas. I took out radio antennas. I took out everything else, and it left me with 4G and 5G. And it seemed like there were a lot, but I'm guessing that if you have Sprint or AT&T or whatever, don't they have roaming out there? Wouldn't Sprint's towers, for example, pick up an AT&T tower? I mean, I don't even know how that works.
Yeah, they do kind of connect with each other. So, when they say triangulation, they're using different towers at the same time to kind of pinpoint. And so that's what they're doing. There's towers that are, there's a few towers in Moscow. I have pictures too. There's a few towers in Moscow and a few towers in Pullman. Now,
Okay.
I have heard people say that they've had issues with their connection when it came to their cell phone coverage. It's something that we've heard, ever since the case came out. But when I went there, I didn't have any cell phone issues until I was literally right by the property itself, a little bit south of the property. And if you use that map coverage, you can actually zoom in on Moscow, and you can literally see where I would have dropped my signal. A little bit south of that, Chalk and Steiner and Valenta Ridge is the 2 spots. And that was really it. Other than that, I had great signal. I streamed at that time and never had any connection issues or anything.
I knew you had gone there, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to have you on our podcast. And before I ask you some more questions about that, what was it like being there? What was it like being in that town? What was it like? You drove by the property where this happened. How did that feel?
Yeah, I spent a week there, a whole week, and all I did was get footage and kind of experience different things as well. I was there at the vigil, different things, talk to different students, whether it's Idaho or Washington State. The feeling I got was half the people are 100% guilty and half are still scared. Um, I would say more are actually still scared than half. So it was one of the cases we really started to get into from the very beginning. And as we would always use Google and maybe some other videos from other content creators to kind of help us with the visuals of the area, when I got there myself, it was a total shock. I'm usually good with directions, without a compass or anything. When I got there, because of all the elevation changes, and I mean from street to street, the changes in elevation are crazy. Uh, I got disoriented in a way, and I really got lost, even though that I had studied these streets for so long, bird's eye view and all these different aspects. When I got there myself, it was totally it felt so cramped. Things were a lot closer than you think they are. Um,
Mhm.
when you're talking about around the crime scene and how it looks like there's more room there, but when you're driving those roads, I don't know how there's uh, uh, more room for more than one car as you're going through any
Yeah.
any of those streets back there. It's so
I
tight
kind of
and
think you know what
congested
you mean with
feeling.
that. Like, there's some roads in New York when you're out of the city that are like that, that are really narrow. I want to kind of pin down something you mentioned. You mentioned speaking to the students. Was there anything particular in doing your interviews that really stood out to you?
That there was some that were just 100%, which totally understand. But there's some that, uh, they still haven't trusted from the very beginning what's being said. And so a lot of them still will group up in places together, just because, or tell each other where they're going more often, things like that. Um, just communicating more. That really, it's about being more aware still, because a lot of them still have questions. You know.
When
Mhm.
you say they still have questions, what do you mean? They're just questioning the way the investigation was done. They're questioning what the local police department did. What is it specifically that they don't trust?
Well, there's a reason that people come to us more than they go to mainstream media nowadays, and because we 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 say things that they feel, and so a lot of the stuff that's being said on YouTube is really how they feel as well. Not
Mhm.
to get into specifics, and that's why I respected all of their comfort when it came to not putting any kind of name on any kind of feelings or statements or anything like that. And so it was more about just being an ear instead of a voice in a way. Um, when it comes to, some of them don't feel that just one, they feel that there was more than one. Um, with a lot of the questions that we might have, whether it's like the PCA or the timeline of events, those are questions for them as well.
Now,
Mhm.
right after it happened, there was one podcaster, and I'm not going to name the podcaster because I don't like to talk about stuff that's not totally verified. But there was one podcaster out in that area that said people knew at 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock on the morning of November 13th, 2022, that something had happened in that house. I don't know. Do you did you get a chance even to talk to some of the students about that or not?
That's something I wasn't even going to ask
Okay.
because I wanted to make sure that I had their 100% comfort, and like that. There's so much speculation out there. Um, Honestly, it would just be continuing more of that speculation. And it was just more about their comfort. So that when I was there, it was more about how what they think, what they've been experiencing last year, uh, questions like that.
Yeah, it's really scary to think about as a student where, like you mentioned, a lot of them still don't feel safe and they text people when they're going places because they don't have that layer of safety. That's kind of crazy. Like you said, that you care about their safety because it's just like you already have the stress of being a student. And now, on top of this, you have people questioning,
Mhm.
are they going to be in that position? Yeah. How did you feel though? Did you feel okay while you were there at least?
Oh, completely.
Mhm.
Before I got there, I was pretty nervous. But, as one of the first things I did is I went there and I got the local gear for each of the schools. I went and spent some of my money at each local spot, for gear. And I just wore the gear and hung around. And mainly, I would say 80% of it was getting footage. A lot of the things that we talk about, that way I can kind of use that myself as I'm explaining things when it comes to different aspects that maybe somebody didn't pick up. One of the things that I did is I wanted to really show like the exact drive from his apartment to the 1122 property, just to show everybody exactly how many cameras exist on these roads. Um, Gone into the internship program that Washington State has with the local university, or I mean with the local police department, because of the crime rates and things that take place. So they're very self-aware of their situations and their environment and everything.
Let
Uh,
me ask you this question, and that is that I had somebody call me from that area, and I spoke to them for an extended period of time, and they said that yes, people from Pullman, Washington regularly drive over to Moscow, Idaho, because in their words, Moscow, Idaho is cooler. It has a bigger
Mhm.
Walmart. There's more little shops. It has the vegan restaurant that Mr. Kohlberg went to. It has a food co-op. So what I was being told, and maybe you can flesh this out for me, is that people from Pullman, Washington is more of a drab kind of a town, and Moscow is kind of a cool kind of a town. And so it's not unusual for the Washington folk to head over
Mm.
to Moscow. Is that
Yeah.
true?
Yeah, when you Pullman, when you're like really like in the downtown part next to like the stadium area, just that little downtown area, you have your shops and your estates and stuff. When you're talking about Moscow, it is true. When you go to Moscow, it's a lot more spread out. There is more establishments there. The shopping is better there. It does have more of a college nightlife vibe to it, as to where Washington State is more like a laid back, calmer kind of area. Yeah, there is quite a difference.
So, the probable cause affidavit, as we all know who are following this case, says that Kohberger, drove around the area of 1122 King Road 12 times before November 13th of 2022. But this person that I spoke to told me, well, geez, it's such a small area in Moscow, and there's so few cell towers that if he had gone over to Walmart, or if he'd gone over to the vegan restaurant, or if he'd gone to the food co-op, that would ping the
Mhm,
same towers, so they wouldn't
mhm.
necessarily be able to tell the difference and triangulate it. I don't know what you know a lot more about that area than I do. Is that true?
Yeah, you actually, and this is what I stated when I was even there, because when I first got there, I wanted to look at where my towers were and where might have some signal issues for safety reasons. And so, as I was looking at the tower, you can see the tower. You don't even, it's before you even get to see the Moscow and the Idaho sign that you're entering into Idaho, you're already utilizing that tower that the 1122 property utilized. Yes.
Okay. All right. Every week for the last, I don't know how many weeks, Lainey, 4 or 5 weeks, we've been doing a series of 5 things or 5 questions or 5 red flags about this case? I'm just curious. I don't want to put you on the spot, but what is your top question about this case?
How the sheath got there.
Now, why do you say that? A lot of people say, well, it's because, Bryan Kohberger was this criminology student. He was in a PhD program, so he was smarter than the rest of us, which I don't buy. That's a whole different subject. And so he would have known better. Is that the basis of what you're saying, or?
No, not at all. When you listen to CC Moore, she talks a lot about the technology and exactly the DNA that they're talking about. And when somebody can go to the store and touch this coffee cup and decide they don't want it, and then I can look at it and go, okay, I'm going to buy it, and I take it home and I do the gross thing and I don't wash it out and I use it. And then I grab my microphone, and that person that touched the cup at the store that didn't want it, their DNA is now on my microphone stand. That makes me question where the sheath came from, because when they have not found a weapon and they can't specifically tell us what the weapon was that was used, then how do we know that the sheath was for the weapon that was used?
Now, I was under the understanding that they had confirmed that it was a K-bar. Why are you telling us that they can't confirm what weapon it was?
When you look at the types of injuries and the wording, it leads you to believe that it's something more than that.
Really? What makes you say that? I mean, I know that it's horrible, the little bit that we do know about the injuries. There were many of them, and there were deep stab wounds, and it sounded like it was almost a military style ambush. So, how do you interpret all that?
Well, when you look at what the coroners stated in interviews in the past, blunt force makes me wonder and makes me question some things. That's all. They have not found the weapon, and
No.
I've always stated that sheath could have been something that maybe one of the victims could have had for protection, and the person that committed the crime maybe took that that was maybe trying to defend them, and maybe that's why they never found that particular knife itself, I suppose. I don't. There's just so many questions when you look at the wording and you see how it's stated, and then you listen to the interviews from the professionals. Little words just kind of stick out and make you question things, or make me question things.
Do you think that one person did this crime, or do you think that more than one person did it?
I feel this way. I feel if one person did this crime, I feel that they were done at separate times.
What do you mean by that?
If one person did this crime, I feel like one floor was at a different time period than the other floor.
So you don't buy the probable cause affidavit, which we've talked about here, that there was a car doing the 3-point turn at 4:06, and then the suspect vehicle pulled away at 4:20, which leaves only 16 minutes to get out of the car, go inside, do everything, get back into the car, and leave in 16 minutes and not leave a trace. So you're not buying that.
Well, one of the main reasons why I went out to Moscow and Pullman was to specifically record the route from his apartment to 1122 to show all the security cameras. And I wanted to do that because if somebody had stalked this property 12 times, was able to commit this crime without leaving any kind of DNA beyond what's on the knife sheath, to where the investigators at first stated it was an self-unalived situation, and that the community didn't have to worry. That's how confusing it was when it came to the crime scene. So with his history and how he supposedly stalked the crime scene, and with his studies that he was studying, why would somebody, if they really did study the digital footprints, drive that route with all those cameras when there's another route that they could have drove, and I included that in that footage as well. And the reason I don't believe why the person drove up that way is because if you're going to drive up that way and you're going and you supposedly stalk the crime scene, then you wouldn't have to do all those weird 3-point turns and turnarounds and all of those things. You would
Right.
already know where you're going. You would already know what time, what spot, how you're going to do it, and all of these things. To me, it looks like it was a chaotic situation before when you look at number one, the route with all the security cameras, and number two, the way that that person in the PCA pulled up. That to me is not very well planned out. It's something that's a rush to judgment, something that you're doing at the last minute, maybe, or maybe somebody that just didn't know where they were going. To me, that doesn't spell out somebody that stalked a crime. So when it comes to the inside of how the crime was committed and how effective they were without leaving any kind of evidence behind other than a small amount on a sheath, then how were they how, how are you so successful inside, but then everything outside of there is just chaotic all over the place to the point where you didn't even take the shortest route back home with only 4 cameras. You took another hour and went south in areas that, if most times when you're in a rural area and you're driving there early in the morning, usually you're going to be the only car in that area. You're going to stand out. So you're going to stand out even more on the route that you went back. So that's why it just doesn't make sense to me. And so for one person to be able to do this crime all at the same time and be so successful without leaving anything behind for anybody to have any kind of lead other than what's on the sheath, that's when I question it. And that's when I have to question the sheath, because then who's to say that it's not a possibility that it wasn't one of the victim's sheath to one of the victim's knives that was taken from the person that committed the crime.
Yeah, as I listen to you, it boggles my mind that the things that you just said, that how could it be that this person went in and went out, and that's the only evidence at all? I mean, that's the only evidence. I mean, people compare him to Ted Bundy, but Ted Bundy left a lot of evidence behind. There was blood
Hmm.
spat, or there were fingerprints and all that kind of stuff. And so it really does kind of boggle the mind that a person could go in and then do what he is accused of doing, and then leaving absolutely nothing, no trails, no footprints, no nothing, except for the one, latent footprint that they found outside of Dylan Mortenson's door, only after they looked for it the second time. It
Hmm.
makes no sense. And so what I'm thinking, and we didn't talk about this before, so if I'm blindsiding you, let me know. But that leads
No, it's fine.
me to ask you the next question. What do you make of this 7 or 8 hour delay between the time the crimes are said to have occurred, between 4:30, and then they didn't call the 911 until 11:58 in the morning? And when the police got there were other people there. What do you make of
Hmm.
that?
Very tainted crime scene. Number one. Um, when it comes to the 8-hour delay, I don't know how somebody could be in that property for even another hour or two after that took place.
Well, they were in a
Um,
frozen shock phase. You don't buy that?
you know what smelling salt does? So like when you pass away, okay, the all of the fluids in your organs, all of your organs, try to find the least path of resistance out, okay? And so you're talking liver, you're talking stomach, you're talking all your organs. So all of that mixed together, there's a reason that you have to be certified to even clean uh, that, because it's biohazardous chemicals. And so even just the liver alone, the chemicals in the liver, if it was outside your liver, it would eat all of your flesh. I mean, it's that toxic. Okay.
Plus, the other
So
thing is the girls were all out, and the girls and Ethan and the others were all out drinking that night, so there would be a lot of fluids in them, I would guess.
right. And when you're talking about the types of injuries that had taken place, and that's why I said it's not necessarily about decay, because you're taking a lot of the process of time out of it by the injuries that took place to the organs. And it already has a quicker access instead of trying to leave the body naturally. And so what I mean by that is all of those fluids that are naturally at a period later on in a decay process, all of those fluids are now introduced a lot more quickly. And so the scent from those fluids would fill up that property to the point, and that's why I bring up smelling salt. You know how strong smelling salt is.
Mm.
You multiply that by, I can't even tell you, because I've experienced the scent myself multiple times, and you can't even compare it to smelling salt, but that's what I use to give people a good idea of really how potent that scent is. And so I don't see how anybody could have been even in there for 8 hours.
Yeah, that honestly, like, as much as it sends like a shiver down my spine to even think of, that's like a really good point that I hadn't even begun to consider. And maybe even another 5 points video worthy. So if you see that, we're gonna have to shout you out on that, because
Oh,
that
thank you.
is unfortunately one of the gruesome truths that you
Right.
lose by seeing this, all through a screen. You don't even like I never even stopped to think about that, which it's all crazy.
So is that why Bethany Funk doesn't want to have anything to do with testifying? When they had a scheduled preliminary hearing, they were trying to get her up from Nevada to Idaho to testify, and she obtained an attorney to quash the subpoena to get her up there. And there have been a lot of rumors, and we don't even have to get into them all, because I get a lot of hate down in the comments every time we talk about Bethany and Dylan. But anyhow, do you think why Bethany wants nothing to do with testifying, because there was something going on and she doesn't want to talk about it?
It's just my opinion. I've always wondered if the statements on the PCA were suggested questions to the witnesses.
Well, I've always thought the same thing. It's just it writes so well. It things kind of follow and they don't make any sense. For example, Dylan is said to have said that the man was clad in black, and one of our commenters correctly pointed out, what 20-year-old says a man was clad
Yeah.
in black? I mean, that's just one
Right.
example of it's all suggestive stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's what police do, because they're not quoting her. They're not saying that that's what she said. They're saying that we're telling you that it's a paraphrase. I mean, they didn't
Mm-hmm.
use that word, but they're telling you that that's it. So I don't know. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think the probable cause affidavit has issues, but I mean, they
Oh,
had to
it
bang
does
it out pretty
definitely.
quickly.
When you have Uniontown, Idaho, and it's really Uniontown, Washington, when you
Mhm.
have different streets that are not streets, they're avenues. And this is supposed to be a PCA for somebody that committed 4 brutal acts, even just small words in the PCA. It's, I don't know. It's like you said, with the statement side, it's very spot on, when it comes to the witness. But everything else, there's little words that are like, you should know that Uniontown's in Washington, not Idaho.
Well, it's also been suggested that the timeline in the PCA is ridiculous, like I pointed out before. In my
Yeah.
view, and it's only speculation, I've never engaged in crimes at all, especially a crime like this. I don't think any human being can do it in 16 minutes, and I know people disagree with me. People say, yes, if you're really motivated and you want to do it, you can get it done. Look what Ted Bundy did down in the sorority back in Florida. I don't buy it, and it's been suggested that that timeline will change because as they pull information out of the electronics of that car, as they find additional information from other cameras that they didn't have before, as they talk to witness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That time, it's been suggested, not by me, but by others, that that timeline is going to change. But that's a problem because now that police officer who wrote the probable cause affidavit goes on the stand. Well, I didn't know then, and he's going to be cross-examined and he's going to be impeached, and so it's quite possible that the whole probable cause affidavit is going to go down. I don't know. That's my speculation.
I
But,
feel the same way. I feel the same way. When you look at it, I mean, it is kind of sloppy, really. And I don't know if it was me. I just put myself in that position. If it was me writing that, I would have cross-checked everything before I even submitted and signed it. So,
and they had 6 weeks to do it too. I mean, approximately from the date of the crime on the 13th of November until the day that they picked up Mr. Kohberger on the 30th of December. I mean, they had plenty of time to do it. And some of that stuff happened early on. The police officers identifying suspect vehicle one as a white Elantra, and I think it was November 27th when they actually pulled a license and a registration pointing to Mr. Kohberger having the bushy eyebrows and all of that. So
right.
it would seem that they had plenty of time. It would seem that I like cops. I'm not going to disparage them, but most police departments have an attorney on board who can write stuff. And I'm not saying that we write any better because sometimes I'm the sloppiest writer around, but they have somebody on board that can. Right. But so I don't know. So yeah, we've been doing these podcasts, the 5 top things. So I guess we've talked about most of them. Anything else that you think that stands out glaringly, other than, like you said before, the DNA and the tracking? Anything else that you think is like a top thing?
Just how did the sheath get there? How did you obtain the profile? And when it comes to, like what you were saying, they had plenty of time. One of the things we went into last night was the night before was the different press conferences, and showing on 12/8, 12/10, 12/12, 12/16, there was no signs of any kind of suspect. They were even asking in December 12/8, check out the police statement from Fry on 12/8 and
Okay.
and all the other ones, and you'll kind of see that. I don't know. I'd be curious to know if you think that they felt any signs that they had Kohberger in their sights beyond what the license and the bushy eyebrow thing in late November. See what you think about those press statements, and I'll send you the links if you want me to.
All right. That's fine.
Let me
Yeah.
know
And we
what
can
you
get back
think.
together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that, by late November, they had him as a suspect. And I've always wondered, well, why didn't they go through his trash then? Why did they have to tail him all the way to Pennsylvania if he
Right.
was such a
Right.
dangerous guy that could commit murders and mayhems and things like that? Why subject him to the rest of the country? Because,
Right.
I mean, in a previous episode, I talked about how cases going back over a decade ago, they have caught suspects who have spit on the sidewalk or thrown cigarette butts on the sidewalk, and the investigators pick that up and take it back to the lab, and they do a DNA test, and bada bing, bada boom. So that's a known technique, and it's been a known technique, although DNA has evolved
Mhm.
over the last 30 years. That has been a known technique for over a decade, and so I don't understand why, once they did have him in their sights at that time, why didn't they go through his trash then? And I know some of our commenters said, oh, well, you just go through his trash because they've done it in
No,
other cases.
I don't think they were onto him until the end of December.
Really?
Besides the license and the bushy eyebrows, if you look at the
Mhm.
license photo, bushy eyebrows, I don't see Captain Kangaroo. I don't see it. So after that, and that's what I'm saying. You look at all these other press conferences, the way that they're asking about information, you're asking for individuals. If you're saying individuals in early December, then how are you already on to one person and it being Kohberger? And like you said, why would you let somebody travel from Pullman, Washington, one side of the country, all the way to Pennsylvania on the other side when you're exposing this person that committed these brutal crimes to all of these children and families throughout that trip?
No, I agree. You raised a really interesting point, though. And when there was a press conference, Chief Fry said, "We have our man," but Prosecutor Thompson said, "We're still investigating." So I might have that
The tip
backwards. It might
line's
have been
still open.
Thompson. It might have been Thompson. One of them said, "We have our man," and the other one said, "No, we're still investigating." And then when Mr. Kohberger was arrested, according to one reporter, anyhow, he said, "Did they catch anyone else?" And so makes you wonder if the law enforcement did in fact have someone else on the radar. And so that's an open question that we've all wondered. And there are a lot of different potential suspects, but we all wonder what happened with that. What do you
Yeah.
think of the theory that maybe it had something to do with the fraternity, that Ethan had words with another guy at the fraternity party that night because the other guy kind of liked his girlfriend, Xana, and there was a little bit of a fight, and Xana had to pull him away, and that there was some involvement of the fraternity, which this is again all speculation. We don't know, commenters. We're speculating. But what do you think of that theory?
Well, airplanes don't crash from one issue. And what I mean by that is there's always a lead up to events before the plane crash. When you're talking about an altercation that took place earlier that night that leads up to an event, I always have to wonder.
No, you're right about the plane crashes. One of my people that know me know that one of my favorite TV shows, if not my favorite TV show, is Aviation Disasters. Do you watch that show?
There you go. Yeah, yes, I do, sir. Yes, I do.
And it's not because
I love documentaries.
I like plane crashes. They're terrible. What is fascinating about that show, and it's going to relate right back to this, what's fascinating about that show is even when there's a plane crash and there are pieces scattered all over a mountainside, the investigators go in very thoughtfully and methodically, and they have the National Transportation Safety Board has protocol, and it's how they do it. And they, where were the wingtips? Where was the back? Where was the front? And then they, first thing obvious is for the black boxes, which they're not black wheel. But you're absolutely right. There's really usually no one cause. There's usually a chain of events, and people usually had an opportunity to not crash the plane. But I'm sorry I went down that rabbit hole, but you're absolutely correct that I think
when it involves two of the victims, I mean,
in this case it's hard for all of us to believe, and maybe that's what you were sensing when you went out to Washington and talked to students, that maybe that's what they're sensing too, that this was like just too simple and easy to say, there, Kohberger did it, now bada bing bada boom, we're done, happy new year. I don't know.
Reasonable doubt.
Yeah. Oh, I think reasonable doubt is there, but that's me. I don't know. There may be a lot more evidence coming because, if Attorney Thompson was correct and the investigation is continuing, we'll probably see a lot more. Well, this has been really interesting. It's really interesting talking to you. I've seen your podcasts. They're interesting. And this has been really interesting talking to you. So thank you so much for joining us. Any parting shots for us?
I just want to say thank you to you two for introducing yourselves to the YouTube true crime community. You guys have been a blessing ever since you started your first minute. And you guys both of you are going to be doing some amazing things in the future. I can already tell. I can already tell.
Oh,
And so
thank you
thank
so
you.
much for
Thank you.
gassing us up. For anybody who may have missed it, this is Everywhereville CJ. So please be sure to look down in the description down below. Well, if I can speak, look down in the description down below. Get that link. Subscribe to his channel if you're not already, which would be insane because so many of your amazing subscribers have come over here and they've been so awesome. So again, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
EvilleCJ, see you again soon, I hope. Take care.
Oh, we will. Thank you.
You have been watching About the Law, a production of the law offices of Andrew D. Myers in Methuen in the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts and in Derry, just outside of Manchester, New Hampshire. Remember to click the like and subscribe buttons down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to share it with your friends and others. If you'd like to talk to me about an injury case, a car accident, a slip and fall, a serious bodily injury case, or some other case, please feel free to contact me. I'd love to talk to you. You can contact us through my website at attorney-myers.com. We have a contact us block, or you can call on one of the telephone numbers we've given there, or you can email me at andrew@attorney-myers.com. The foregoing is offered for informational purposes only. It is not intended as and does not constitute legal advice. Laws vary widely from state to state. You should rely only on the advice given to you during a personal consultation by a local attorney thoroughly familiar with state laws and the area of practice in which your concern lies. This podcast must be and hereby is labeled advertisement in some jurisdictions.